Okay, so we are going to now speak about this coming week's Torah portion. This coming week's Torah portion, somewhat like the Torah portion we read yesterday, has a fascinating assortment of mitzvahs, and you could probably spend the whole year going through them.
What page?
This page will be page 113, and this Torah portion has 74 different mitzvahs. And we're going to focus today on just one of those mitzvahs, which is at the very end of the Torah portion. And it's actually the second time we have this mitzvah mentioned. And it's a mitzvah of remembering something called Amalek. A virulently anti-Semitic. And just historically, and we're going to get into it a little bit, when the Jews come out of Egypt, there are tribes in the desert, there are tribes who are near where they left, and those who are in Canaan, Israel, where they're coming. And there's this unlike, there are differences, there's fear, there's all the regular xenophobia, that happens, and not everybody's nice in the neighborhood, clearly. But there's one specific tribe who stands out, and they're called Amalek. And Amalek, they're seen as remember, the Jews had just come out of Egypt, and the world had watched how Egypt got whacked pretty badly for abusing the Jewish people. So it's not like anyone said, I don't believe in this. They were very well aware. Good morning. They were very well aware. No problem. They're very well aware that there's a God and that whatever you like. Today you got choices. Yeah, lots of choices.
Good.
Yes. Box seats. So they knew that what they were doing was that just morally wrong. They knew that the Jews had what had just happened to Egypt, and they knew they were going to get themselves into trouble, because if God had whacked the Egyptians, why wouldn't God whack them? But they had such a hatred for the Jews that they knew they were going to sustain injuries and damage, but they wanted to get them anyway. They wanted to see if they could at least land a few punches before they get whacked. And another thing we're told is that they wanted to, there was such an intimidation after a year of going on, everything we read about on Passover, and a year full of plagues and everything that the Egyptians had endured. And now, so the non-Jewish world, even before the internet, everyone was aware of what was going on. This was supernatural stuff happening. And they wanted to kind of cool the intimidation factor. Say, it's okay. Notwithstanding what just went on, they're not bulletproof. We're going to go after them. It's because there was this aura of invincibility. Don't mess with these Israelites. And they wanted to lower the temperature on that, this Amalek tribe. So the level of anti-Semitism is considered to be a level of hatred. The level of also this impudence towards God is seen as above and beyond the normal anti-Semitism that was going on in the world then, goes on in the world today. So the Torah says, and we'll get into a little bit now, the Torah points out Amalek. The Torah doesn't like anti-Semitism or hatred of anyone. But the idea is that here, this is something that it says we have a responsibility to remember what happened and to erase this concept from the world. Now, that's kind of a global thing. First of all, we don't know anybody who's a Amalek today. So we just don't know, especially after the Assyrians conquered so many countries there in Mesopotamia. We don't know who they are. But they're a concept. We do know that Haman, in the Purim story, is described in his lineage as having come from Amalek, which fits. he had good genes, or he was loyal to his genes. But and when I grew up, and you'll have it here also, say Hitler must have been from Amalek. That's just kids talk because no one has any idea. But conceptually, that was that type of virulent hatred. So here, what they want to talk about is the existence of evil, and the existence of evil is not exclusive to Amalek, but Amalek is a very fair departure point or entry point into understanding how God could create a world, an all-powerful God, an all-loving God, a kind God could create a world with evil. It's here. Now, we can talk about it in two different tracks. You could talk about it on the global perspective. How is it that there's this Amalek or Al-Qaeda, or a lot of we could sit here and talk about the evils of the world and people bombing others or killing others or whatever it is that goes on. Just go on the open your paper or open the internet any day that there is individual evils or general evils in the world. But most of the time, at least from a Hasidic perspective, and this is very much based on the Rebbe's approach to Torah, it was more about what does that mean for me? Because what can I do about Al-Qaeda? And what do Nazis? I don't know these people, and I'm not in law enforcement. And what can I possibly do? The approach. And it's the approach that I want to set that key for what we're talking about today. It's really about what is it about in ourselves? Because to say anyone sitting around this table, we're going to assume has never, God forbid, perpetrated the evil that we talk about. That's in today's headlines. But where does evil start from? Evil starts from selfishness. Evil starts from disrespect or insensitivity to others. Now, I'm selfish in a normal range, insensitive in a normal range. Not going to end up in prison for that, and it is what it is. Torah is saying it's not that. You don't take it as is what it is. For the way for me to battle, for us each individually to battle the larger, seemingly insurmountable force of evil, is to struggle with it in ourselves. Again, it doesn't mean that any of us has a desire or thought, God forbid, to murder someone today. But that's, in a way, that's an extreme expression of anger, of certainly insensitivity, of wanting to do something for ourselves irrespective of the expense to others. That does happen in what we call a normal range of human activity. So we're going to try and look at this much more from a personal perspective. Obviously it crosses over into the global, but the idea is much more personal. And one of the reasons I'm emphasizing it now is because towards the end, I see one of the translations they had, I think, is inaccurate, and it's more at like global, and it's much more focused on ourselves. So before we get into this, and we will, just a general idea of evil. I'll give you a bit of a nutshell. God gave us a world. God gave us a life as a gift. And the gift is not only that we are able to go on vacation and have a good steak, it's that we're able to lead a meaningful life. We're able to build meaningful relationships. We're able to make a meaningful impact on the world. And we're able to make a meaningful impact on ourselves that we can develop. For that reason, God put into the world the potential for what we will call evil. Now, evil is a big word, but remember, evil, I'm sure none of us see ourselves as doing evil, but selfishness at someone else's expense is on that spectrum. So God gave us that potential. And the more we feed the selfishness muscle, the closer we get to really doing more real damage. Self-discipline is the name to the game, and it may start off with a piece of chocolate, but but having a piece of chocolate is not evil, but following the self-absorption or the self-indulgence, that's where, when you look at what happens in the headlines, it started off somewhere, unless it's psychopathic. So one of the Zohar, and again, if I had written this, I probably would have put it in here, and some of you have heard this from me before. The Zohar, the foundational book of Kabbalah, describes God's creation of the concept of evil with the following metaphor. It says there was a king who had an only child, prince, and the prince is being raised. First of all, eventually, the king wants this son of his to be able to properly manage the kingdom. He's got to take care of people, and he's given the best tutors and a very, very sanitized upbringing within the realm of the palace, and he's taught right from wrong. The king realizes that while he's been taught right from wrong, he really doesn't have many options for wrong, because he's living all within the palace grounds. There's not much he can do. Let me know if you can't hear me online. This thing just went off. Okay, sorry.
Try hitting enter.
I'm going to try and do this. There we go. I don't know why it does this. Sorry. Couldn't connect. Okay. Can you hear me on oh, yeah, you can probably hear me through the computer. Okay. I don't think it's worth redoing that. Okay. So I'm assuming you can hear me because you haven't signed off yet. Okay, so so this king, in order for his son's welfare, what he does is he hires a young lady to approach this prince and to try to convince him, to seduce him into behavior which he's been taught are beneath him, things he shouldn't do. So this young lady, who's a loyal subject of her king, she's got a very difficult conflict, an internal conflict. On the one hand, she has to do her best to seduce this boy. That's what the king wants. On the other hand, she knows that if she's successful, her king's going to have a lot of pain. So externally, she's doing her best with her wiles to try and attract this boy to do the wrong thing. But deep inside, she's really hoping that he doesn't listen, because she's loyal to her king. And that's what the Zohar says. That's the force of evil. Nothing works or exists outside of God. It's not working. Nothing exists outside of God. And there's no fighting God. There's no original call, Antichrist. None of that. God is in control of everything. And if God wanted to dispel evil from the universe, it would be done in a split second, as soon as God wants it. But for our own benefit, there is this idea of challenges. And the reason when we do something good, the reason that what makes that virtuous is that we didn't have to do that. We could have done something that's not so good. We're not robots. We're not automatons, and we have this volition. We can choose to do A or B, and A is moral, and B may not be so moral. And the fact that we chose A is virtuous because we didn't choose B, and we could have chosen B. But that means that B needs to exist. So that is really a core of what we're talking about here, is that ultimately everything comes from God. Now, and we will get into this, but I think it's probably good to just give the nutshell. One, in the good, and I hate to use the word evil all the time because evil is so dark and it's beyond us, hopefully, in our minds. But that good and evil, those poles are represented in the Torah, but by twins who were born to Isaac and Rebekah, Yitzchak and Rivka. One twin was named Yaakov, Jacob, was our ancestor, and his twin brother was Esau, who was someone who did a lot of damage. He's the face of immorality. Let's call it that way. Evil. So we're told that Isaac, their elderly father, who was the picture of holiness, had a special joy, a special taste, so to speak, for Esau. Even though Esau was a tough kid and a tough adult, he saw the possibility of transformation. And that was beautiful. So the idea of Jacob, who's just a good kid, and just always coming home with A's, never getting into scrapes, always doing the right thing, that's great. Wonderful. And you're sitting on the boardwalk talking to your friends and say that this kid, Gavaldik, is a cardiologist, everything works. But this other one, if you want to talk about the actual, imagine, take a kid with the challenges, the personality challenges, and whatever that Esau had, and where he can channel his aggressive nature and turn it around and make headway, working upstream against the reality he has. That's beautiful. And Yitzchak saw that there's a lot of potential here. And one of the things there, and again, if we had the text here, it would be a little easier. But in the narrative of Yitzchak, if you remember from the scripture, he was old and he was nearing his death, and he was blind, and he wants to bless his sons, and he asks his son Esau, who's not the good guy, he says, "Bring me delicacies." And the Jewish spirituality says, it's the end of your life, you're giving blessings to your kids, now's the time for a hot dog. What's the delicacies? The delicacies is, he said, the language is, a delicacy means that you're able to not just take something that's straight up sweet. You're able to work with ingredients and take things that may be a little bit too pungent, take it on their own, but they can add. And the dish brings out the best in elements and ingredients, which on their own might not be so tasty. And that's what he was saying to his son. Right now, the way you act is not tasty. Bring me delicacy means take your personality and work with it and present me with something before I die. I want to be able to see you living a better life. And that would be a delicacy for me. More in you than in Jacob. Because Jacob, he's straight up cotton candy. This is just, there's the beauty of the transformation. And that's going to be pretty much a very core avenue that we're going to be pursuing today. So now let's get to the actual text. Oh, it's not on the thing. Oh, no, something, I don't have the luxury of not doing this. So let me, I don't know how I would have to sign off. I just don't know how I could
Go to settings,
go to settings in
when there's a display.
Well, I usually do that. I did that, and it's not working now. Well, I think that the only way I get it for, oh, actually, no, online, you should be able to see it online. I'm sorry. If I do this, you should be able to see it online. Let's try this. You just won't be able to see it on the screen. Okay, so let's try the share screen. And that disappears. Okay. I apologize for this.
The instructions don't say it, but try hitting the left button on your mouse.
Problem is
Not the keypad, the mouse.
Okay, so let me just try this first 1 second.
Are you blowing shofar today?
I would like to blow shofar today. It's that time of year. So, it's part of the deal. Comes with the cover. Sorry about this, guys. So it's not going to be as clean. Prepared this all before, but as they say in Yiddish, Mensch tracht and Gott lacht. All right, so let's look at. Text 1. It says, remember what Amalek did to you during your journey shortly after you left Egypt. Erase the memory of Amalek from beneath the heavens. Do not forget. That's what this week's Torah portion is. It says, now, there, I want to show you another one, which is not in what they gave us here, but I want to.
Contradictory.
I'm sorry? Right. Remember and do not forget. That's a very good point. That it's okay. I lost the other thing too. Forget about it. It seems like if you remember, something, then you're not going to forget. But the idea is that, and if you erase it, you're going to forget. So it really means don't forget to erase it. Don't forget until totally obliterated. Don't forget that this evil exists in the world.
Actually, I don't really see that as a contradiction there.
Okay.
Because I believe what the erasure that's referred to there is eliminate the bloodline, but don't forget.
Yeah, in the physical sense, it's the bloodline. You're right. But here, yeah, I mean, I think that's fair what you're saying there. So, text 2, we have from. Now, what I was going to show you, and that disappeared too, is that this appears earlier in the Torah, and there's language there that God puts his hand on his throne and swears that Amalek needs to be erased. Now, the way the Torah, the name of God is written there is written. It's written only. It's 4 letters. It's only 2 of the letters are there. One of the word for throne is kise, which means a chair, but it means a throne. There is only written as it's. Those are 3 letters. Only 2 letters are written there. And Rashi there, primary commentary on the Torah, quotes from the Talmud that says that God's name and God's throne will not be complete until Amalek is obliterated. That's very strong. Now, what is a throne and what is a name? A name is how we are known by others, how there's an expression in the world. And a throne, a chair, is where we lower ourselves into. So the idea is God's presence in the world will not be seamless until the concept of Amalek is taken away. It doesn't only mean these individuals. It means that there's a concept in the world. There's a concept that exists within everybody of Amalek, and it's very serious. Now, if you look at text 2, God commanded us to remember what Amalek did to us when he hurried to be the first to harm us. We are commanded to rouse our passions to fight and hate him. We must always remember the commandment and never allow our hatred of Amalek to fade with time. So this great rabbi from the Middle Ages makes it very personal, and it is at some level, and so that this is an everlasting mitzvah. Now, the way into understanding what this means and the idea of the existence of evil that God gave us, this is based on a talk of the Rebbe's, and the Rebbe uses a cryptic medrash to try to understand it. Medrash is Talmudic, it's Talmudic rabbis' quotes, but it's often done in cryptic language, and the Rebbe addresses it. So, as a preliminary to that medrash, we point out that Torah tells us twice in the Torah. Remember, actually one twice, but 2 ones that are relevant here. Says to remember the day of Shabbos to sanctify it. So memory means I remember I have a cousin in Seattle. I can remember I have a cousin in Israel I haven't seen in 15 years. Memory, it can be very faint, it can be very distant. When the Torah says remember, it means experience, re-experience. So when it says remember Amalek and remember Shabbos, it doesn't mean remember, it means actually say something. When we make a Kiddush Friday night, we're fulfilling remember Shabbos. Why? Because we're saying something. On the Shabbat before Purim, we read this Torah portion from this week. We read it again as the maftir, as the last reading of the Torah, because it has to be expressed. It's not just about memory; it's about experience. And these are 2 where the Torah says, remember, re-experience. Shabbos has to be something that we remember in a way that's not just a memory, but we experience it, we speak about it. And the same thing applies to Amalek. 1 second. So text 4. Let's look at the Medrash. The Medrash says this. The Jewish people complained. Moses, our teacher, they said to Moses, we have a problem. One passage reads, remember what Amalek did to you. Another passage reads, remember the day of Shabbos to sanctify it. How can both prevail? They had a problem. Well, what's the problem? You can remember 2 things. You can remember 10 things. But somehow they found it impossible to reconcile. How can we remember Shabbos and also remember what Amalek did? We need to understand the question. And then we're going to need to understand the answer too. But let's first understand the question. Because the question doesn't seem to make sense. As you'll see here, Rabbi of the Middle Ages writes that there are 6 constant commandments that we must not forget all our lives for even a moment. They are to believe in God, to reject all other deities, believe in God's unity, love God, fear God, respect God, and resist the temptations of our heart and eyes. These are things that should be playing in the background of our mind. Obviously, you can't be focusing on all these things because you got to work and you have a lot of other things to talk about. But these are things that should be constantly in our mind. So why can't you have 6 different things? It's not a contradiction to having a conversation with a friend. It's in the back of your head. So you remember that Amalek is a problem. You remember it, and you remember Shabbos. So why was it such a problem for the Jews at the time, where they said, "Oh my gosh, we can't reconcile this"? So now let's go to Moses' answer, which is also going to be difficult to understand. Moses replies, "You can't compare a goblet of fine wine to a cup of vinegar. They are both cups. This is a cup to observe and sanctify the Shabbos, and this is a cup to destroy and uproot the sons of Amalek." I understand every word what he's saying over there, but I'm not sure how one's an answer to the next. What was his point? So the Jews have a problem with reconciling, remembering Amalek and Shabbos, and Moses answers something about vinegar and wine and cups, and says that it means Shabbos is like the wine, and Amalek is like the vinegar, and wine is good. Vinegar is not tasty. But what is he saying here? So let's take a look at text 7. Let's try to understand. And the first point here is that, as I mentioned before, remembering means re-experiencing. So what is Shabbos supposed to be? Shabbos reminds us, at its core, Shabbat mindset, we're thinking that we live in God's world. God's creation. It's text 7 on page 117. It's God's creation, and we live in God's world, and we have an opportunity to be partners with God in creation. And we spend 6 days tackling the world, refining the world, improving the world, benefiting from the world, and then we sit back and say, "God, you know something? It's your world. Thank you." Let's look at how this is in text 7.
Actually, there is a subtext there in text 6. When he compares wine and vinegar,
Yeah,
because vinegar is made from wine that has gone bad.
we're going to get there. Very good. Very good. Very good. Okay, good. No, that's an excellent point. Excellent point. And the Rebbe is going to develop that. But how does that answer? I mean, your point is a good point, but do you have an answer what Moses was saying?
I would say, obviously, at some point, their souls were spoiled.
Well, you can say that. That's not where he's going. Let's go. And I don't think that ever was the one that was ever going to talk about people having spoiled souls, because at the core, none of us are spoiled.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here let's look at text 7 from one of the medieval rabbis was quoted for. The commandment of Shabbos. This is a commandment to remember the greatness of this day and to fix faith in creation in our hearts. As the Torah states, remember the Shabbat to sanctify it, for God made the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. We sanctify it over a cup of wine because it is human nature to be aroused by wine as it satiates and causes joy. Wine was the preferred beverage, and that's why we have wine. A lot of celebrations in Judaism are around wine, because we want to have our bodily satisfaction in sync with the fact that there's a spiritual satisfaction, and having a good wine is part of the idea of this satisfaction. I have often explained, writes this rabbi, that our inspiration is more permanent when we translate it into physical acts. Thus, our sages taught that those who prefer bread over wine sanctify the Shabbat over bread, for each aroused by the things we crave. So a person can actually make Kiddush not over wine, but over challah. But the point is that it's about remembering a day, remembering God's creation, and to fix the faith in creation into our minds. And if we look at text 8, this is language from, I'll do this. Okay. Hang on a second. Text 8, we have from our morning prayers. It says, "In his goodness, God constantly renews the works of creation each day. Which means that we're not sitting here in a world and say, we believe that thousands of years ago, or however long ago one believes the Big Bang happened, the godly orchestrated Big Bang. That was creation, and we believe in that creator. Our faith is actually that God is consistently creating, that God is not a distant creator, but that God is consistently bringing us into creation. And the flow, the spiritual flow that brings us, it's like, my DNA is not creating me, but it's not just like I was born with it. It's what gives me who I am right now. You can't suck my DNA out of me and just have a hollow me. That's me. The godliness that creates me is also me, and then you. So the idea of Shabbos is really getting into a place where we recognize that our entire lives, the whole week, we pursue with the business and the family and all this, the good stuff. It's all godly, God's creation. It's God's gifts. It's real, but we want to appreciate it, that it has purpose, and God gives it us for a purpose. So Shabbos, the Shabbos mindset is a very, very connected and holy mindset. And we're going to sit down and have a good meal. But you're not detached from the world. We see the world differently. Now, in text 9, so you think about that. That's Shabbos is a very, very exalted mindset. What's the Amalek mindset? Very much not that. Amalek did not have the idea of thinking about Amalek, thinking about selfishness and coarseness. Not only Amalek, think about it in today's world, that how people act sometimes. And we, again, just look at the headlines. Amalek has a different attitude. Our sages of blessed memory described him as one who knows his master and deliberately rebels. Amalek, remember, they acted on the Jews. They attacked the Jews right after they came out of Egypt. They knew exactly what they were doing, what they saw, what had happened to the Egyptians. It's not like, oh, I didn't know there was a God. They knew exactly what was going on, and they went for it anyway. Amalek is impudent. Amalek did not lack knowledge of God. On the contrary, he knew and recognized God's greatness. Nevertheless, he refused to be intimidated. His impudence and audacity drove him to reject God without reason or justification, like impudent people who know that they are inferior, yet stand up brazenly to powerful or righteous people. So these two mindsets, it's very difficult to be in a truly Shabbos mindset and feel like it's God courses through the universe. And it's all God's universe. And everything, nothing exists without the divine flow. And we recognize that in our lives and recognize that in nature, and then realize that there are people who fight against it. It's not that you can't remember that. It's just irreconcilable. How is that even possible? And that's what the Jews said to Moses. If you're saying, remember Amalek and remember Shabbos, and it means experience, we can't, when we're in a Shabbos mindset, it's hard for us to really understand and accept that there are people who fight against it. It's so clear to us that we're living in God's world. It's so clear to us that our blessings come from God. It's so clear to us that we have a purpose here. And I know they exist. I don't forget that, but to experience, to understand, I can't understand that. And here, this is a quote they have here from text 10. This is a quote from during the times of the Holocaust. It says, Amalek and Haman, targeting the Jews less as a people than as a divine people. Therefore, their war is directed mainly against the God of Israel. They object to his Torah. They are uncomfortable with a God who sees everything and demands an accounting for wrongdoing. These things are not to the Amalekites' liking. They don't want them. They therefore wish to destroy the Jewish people who stand for perfect faith in the God of Israel. This is why God's name and throne, and that's why I mentioned it before, that the Torah says earlier, that God's name will not be complete, and God's throne will not be complete as long as Amalek exists. Because as long as you live in a world where there's this sense of selfishness, God's presence is not complete, because they're pushing back. Consequently, we never forget what Amalek did to us and what he continues to do. So we think about it in our personal lives also. If there's a part of my life, if say I am totally committed to a person or to God, but there's a part of my life which I kind of leave out of that, then I'm not totally committed. So to say that, yes, we all make our choices, but the idea is that if you're looking at God's presence in the world, it's not going to be full as long as there's that Amalek. As long as we say, I don't want you in this part of life, I don't need God's influence, or there I don't believe in it. Let me just. So now, remember, we were analyzing this message. So to understand what the Jews were saying to Moses, the explanation here is that they said to Moses, if remembering means re-experiencing and full-bodied experience, we can't get it. When we're in the Shabbos mindset, we don't understand how this selfishness and the damage, this self-absorption and the disrespect and the evil of Amalek, how it exists. That was their question. Not that they can't remember them, but it is so irreconcilable if we're going to be in that mindset and still remember that mindset. I still be able to absorb it and digest it. So what did Moses answer? He said that there's cups. One's a cup of wine, one's a cup of vinegar. What is vinegar? As Axel correctly pointed out, a sour liquid obtained by fermentation of dilute alcoholic liquids. So it all comes from wine. In the Hebrew also, just for benefit of some underlying help of this, in Hebrew, the word chametz, like we don't eat on Passover, leavened breads. So chametz represents it's not just flour and water, but it's risen, it's puffed up, it's ego, it's self. The Hebrew word for vinegar is chometz. It's very similar. In the language, in Talmudic language in Hebrew, when we talk about someone who has gone astray, whose behavior has gone south, the language is hichmitz. In other words, they became chametz, or they became sour, or became vinegared. So the idea represents it's not just the vinegar, that there's a certain moral souring that God put into the world, that there's this potential for the moral souring. So what happens when a bottle of wine turns to vinegar? Without getting into all the technical details, text 11b, the wine has simply gotten infected with bacteria. This bacteria occurs naturally in the air and on fruit. This leads to acetic acid building up in the wine in combination with too much exposure to oxygen, so it's oxidization. When this happens, you'll immediately notice that your wine will take on a sharp vinegar smell. That's also been described as being like nail polish remover. So vinegar, not something, you're not happy when the wine goes there. Now, here's from the Rabbi. When we examine the concept, and there's an idea they're going to bring here later, I'm not sure exactly how they structured it. Vinegar has, the Talmud says, vinegar actually has a positive use. If someone feels like they're in a swoon or a faint, drinking something pungent like that, a little bit of that, will get someone back. So as much as we don't want our wine turning to vinegar, people have it in their kitchen. There's a point to it. It can be used and it can be helpful. We want it. We buy it. We pay money for vinegar. So it has an upside. So, and it's going to come up here also. Again, I'm not sure how they, their sequence here. When we examine the concept of a mullik from the perspective of Jewish mysticism, we discover that a mullik represented by vinegar is also rooted in holiness. It means nothing doesn't come from God. Everything has its core, even if it's totally, God doesn't create any junk, but we can make ourselves into junk, depending on the choices we make. Can anything deliberately rebel against God if there's nothing besides him? It's only possible because there's nothing else that God cannot do. So we said before about the metaphor of the king and the prince. The king's the king. God's God. There's nothing is God there. If God doesn't want Al-Qaeda to exist, they're gone in a second. God, you can be sure that the concept of Al-Qaeda or Nazism or whatever, all of these things are repugnant to God. But God allows in a world where it will be meaningful for us, that there are going to be options. And people can take themselves to terrible places. That's part of we have a world with free choice. If it wasn't a world of free choice, it's not the same gift. So it does, the potential comes from God. And the idea that we can do that and we can fight against it. And even someone who did something evil yesterday, today can reverse themselves. That's a tremendous gift to God. So if you look here, it says 13a, what I mentioned before, the Talmud tells us vinegar restores the soul. It doesn't mean that in a spiritual sense. It means if it's something that can spark you up a little bit if it's used correctly. So it has an upside to it.
I believe it also says elsewhere that wine restores the soul.
Correct. But that's more pleasant in a more pleasant way. Correct. And here, this is from Jewish law. We make blessings on our food. What happens when the food spoils? When a food item spoils, the blessing we recited before it must be altered, because now you're eating an apple, it has this blessing. Eating pretzel has that blessing. What happens if it's spoiled? Rather than chanting a blessing for this particular food category of wine, in this case we're talking about wine, recite the blessing that encompasses all food groups. That is word made all. There's a catch-all blessing for everything. But then there's specifics. Wine has its own. But if wine became vinegar, you don't make a blessing over wine, you make a blessing over that God created everything. When wine goes to vinegar and becomes so acidic that people refrain from drinking it, the blessing for it, should one drink it, is that his word made all. But there's still a blessing because it still has a function and we still thank God for it. Oops. So
is one of the implications of this analogy, that the Amalekites are descended from either Isaac or Jacob as
it's I don't think it's genealogical, because even if they're not, if anything created by God has a core of holiness, and that can be accessed. Now, even if someone ended up being a murderous mafia member, and so in their lives, you say the sum total of their lives, there's a lot of evil, and that's real. We're not going to no, totally, it's evil. That person was created by God. That person had a potential to do good things. Hitler must have had potential to do good things, or else why do we call him evil? If God created him to be a murderer, it's not his fault. That's the way he was programmed. So in order for us to cry Hitler, you have to believe he had the opportunity to paint habitats for humanity in Bavaria. He could have done good things for the world, and he made himself into a monster. That doesn't mean he didn't have a soul. It doesn't mean he didn't have potential to bring good to the world. And it's specifically because he had potential to bring good things to the world. That's why it's horrible that he chose to do that. If he had no choice, what do you want from the guy? If a murderer if someone is born damaged, where they cannot choose to do good things, that's on God. It's not on them. So here, an element, a backbone to Jewish thinking is that we have choice. So here, what they're talking about the Amalek is that in its core, it's like the example of the king. God doesn't want what Amalek does, but God puts that into humanity, into reality, where we have to push back against it. We have to push back against hatred. We have to push back against anti-Semitism. We have to push back against the hatred of any peoples, or hurting of any peoples. And the idea of hopefully not just pushing back, but really trying to change people. That to be able to shift their perspectives. Because everyone, like I say, we don't see anyone as all black. They may have totally blackened themselves, but the potential is to be able to tickle their essence and be able to, maybe they can, at some point in their lives, be able to see the error of their ways. So if you look at here how the Rabbi explained Moses' response in the Medrash.
14.
Yes, text 14. Sorry for that. And it's page 123. Moses implied all this by saying, a cup of wine cannot be compared to a cup of vinegar. Shabbos and Amalek, these two things which God says, remember and speak about it, are both cups. What's a cup? A cup is a vessel. It's a receptacle with which you can take something in. There are both cups which we are filled with the revelation of sacred godliness. So there are cups where we can absorb God in our lives. We can absorb God in our lives through Shabbos. That's easy. But also through our approach to Amalek, which is also rooted in holiness. But the two cups are not equal. The Shabbos cup urges us to observe and sanctify, while the Amalek cup urges us to punish. I wouldn't say to punish, but the point is to push back against it. By remembering Shabbos, we reveal God's omnipresence on earth. Remembering Amalek doesn't reveal God's presence on earth. Only when we punish Amalek, crush and obliterate all movements. This sounds like it shouldn't be movements. It should be. It's not a good translation of the. This is Yiddish, but that word is Hebrew. It means really all rhythms that aim to rebel against God is God's true omnipotence revealed. In other words, we push back against it. Thus, vinegar is an apt metaphor for Amalek. When we obliterate Amalek, the cup of vinegar is revealed as a medium that restores and revitalizes our soul. This is because remembering to destroy Amalek demonstrates that Amalek's existence derives exclusively from God's unlimited omnipotence. So think about it this way, and that's the way I started off. If we sit here and we bemoan the history of Amalek, the Nazis, terrorism, it's big ideas. And then we close this and we go back to our lives because none of us work with that. But what it's trying to say, this point is that there's a little bit of Amalek in everybody. We have to look at ourselves and say, how much do we open ourselves up to who we really need to be? Like if we sat around here and we speak about the polarization, the political polarization, which I think we all know exists in this country and it seems like around the world. So we'll beat our chests and we'll walk out of here. What do we say? Maybe we have to focus on being a little more tolerant to actually hear what someone who I don't agree with. Someone I don't agree with. Someone, instead of saying you're a threat to our democracy and you're evil, you see, I don't like it's try and hear the core of what they're saying, and maybe they've got a point I don't fully agree with. But it's the idea that we can do in our own lives, and if we do it in our own lives, we push back against a problem that's really beyond us. But the problems in our lives are not beyond us, and the more we do that, the more we kind of choke the negativity that's bigger than us. And that's what the language is doing. We're talking about here. So key points. Yeah.
One of the things that seems to be an ongoing theme here, that Amalek is a spore, a spirit, that can be, that is in the air. And either it takes root or it doesn't.
I think that's well put, and I think that's a generally a Jewish spiritual perspective, that all things in the Torah are reflected in you. It's all the Torah is your story and my story and your story. And we made to see, am I a Molech? I don't know, I never did any of that. But if a Molech means knowing what's right, it's saying, I'm going to put that on hold and do what I want right now, that's an Molech thing.
Mhm.
Is it evil? Is it horrible? Did I hurt someone? Not necessarily, but it's between me and God.
Mhm.
So we really don't have a concept of like Satan, right?
We have Satan. I'm glad you brought that up. The Talmud says that the Satan, because Satan comes from us, it's in our scripture. But the Talmud says that Satan has the sake of heaven in mind.
Because what?
That has the sake of heaven in mind. In other words, Satan works for the company, for God. So what does that mean? There's negativity in the world, and the Satan idea is like an accuser pointing out our negative. This, and we'll have a Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It comes up. Is that in the world in which God created a complex world where there's negativity, and we have to deal with it. And but ultimately, nothing acts outside of God. Satan doesn't fight God. That's a Christian thing. But that Satan's doing God's work. Now, God doesn't want negativity, but God has to hold his nose, so to speak, and allow for negativity so that we have the challenges of life. In a future world, a Mashiach world, there's no need for a Satan. Right now, Satan that idea has worked. So Satan is a concept. It's a force. It's not a specific individual. But the language of the Talmud is that Satan works for the sake of heaven, like the same idea of that metaphor with the king and the prince. Okay, key points. Number one, to remember something in its truest sense is to relive the emotional experience, whether trauma or joy. Number two, remembering Shabbat entails living inside the moment of creation, subsumed by God's omnipresence. On the other hand, remembering Amalek includes living inside the rebellion against God. 1 second. Number three, the two can only be relived simultaneously because both communicate the same point. Shabbos declares that God is the true master who is omnipotent and omnipresent. Amalek declares that God is omnipresent even in the face of evil. Number four, remembering Amalek is not enough. You must remember to fight Amalek until he is crushed. Only then is the full scope of God's omnipresence revealed. And finally, number five, evil exists only to demonstrate God's omnipresence in the face of evil, which is why we fight evil wherever we find it and why we can always overcome it. All right, so any questions? If not, thank you.
Very good. Sometimes we behave from ourselves. And usually, even when you go to the street, you have to avoid certain areas.
Yeah.
You know, they are dangerous. But if you don't know this one, even though I was thinking something right now, the tunnel wouldn't exist without evil. Because if you know that the bottom line is you have to behave, you have to do this, don't do this, because evil is there.
Right. I think a lot of things, they say necessity is the mother of invention. You face a challenge, it brings out ingenuity. The Jews have we didn't ask for the trouble, but looking back, we grew a lot through all the problems we faced.
The light wouldn't exist without darkness.
That's right. Yeah, that's okay. Have a great week, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.